All right, everyone, welcome to the April 19th Economic Matters hearing. Here on the dais, we have Alderman Savage and myself. Today, we have a bit of a special meeting. There is no legislation on the agenda, but we are going to get an update from Mr. Rice on the economic conditions in Annapolis at the moment, and then an update from Mr. Lashinsky on the comp plan and economic development with that. So, Mr. Rice, actually, wait. First of all, do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
I will second. All those in favor? Aye. All right. Do I have a motion to approve the meeting minutes from 3:14?
So moved.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Now with the background out of the way, Mr. Rice.
Thank you. Glad to be here. I'll go through some of the statistics quickly, and then I'll talk a little bit about some of the things that I'm excited about. Our commercial vacancy rate for March, 6.4%. That's a combined rate. We had 2 new businesses that opened in the city last month. I suspect that we actually have more. But we're switching from Trackit to Intergov, and I think in that transition, the reporting is a little slower than normal. So I suspect that next month, I'll have to revise that number. Last month, the Economic Development team provided outreach and assistance to 30 businesses and partners. And we also kicked off the seasonal parklet program on Monday. A couple of things are different with the seasonal parklet program this year. Well, the main thing actually is the price, or I'll say the pricing scheme. Last year we had a pricing schedule that essentially facilitated differential pricing in different parts of the city. This year we have a flat rate of $25 regardless of where the parklet is located. It was deemed to be more equitable. Yes, sir.
$25 a what?
Oh, I'm sorry. $25 per space per day.
Per parking space?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. So that's the big change with the program. Some of the other things that at least that I'm excited about, and I think we're excited about, the Hillman Garage grand opening. We're working with the mayor's office on actually, I'll call it the reopening of Hillman Garage. We're helping to plan that event, and we want to make sure that we engage the business community downtown. Of course, Downtown Annapolis Partnership, the Maryland Avenue and State Circle Association. I'm also excited about the Annapolis Blues Football Club, and this, of course, is our new soccer team. They're having their preseason opener on May 10th. They'll be playing the Philadelphia Union Development Squad. And on June 3rd is the season opener, and they'll be playing FC Frederick. And these games will be played at Navy Marine Corps Memorial Stadium. Very exciting to have professional soccer in the city of Annapolis. We are also working on a speed lending event that will occur on May 11th. That will be held at Pitt Moyer. And essentially what this will be is local businesses will have an opportunity to meet with lenders, bankers, and talk about financing opportunities, growth plans and that sort of thing, and network. And access to capital, of course, is important particularly for small businesses. So we're excited about that as well. Last but not least, in a couple of days, you may have heard there will be a spring sailboat show here in Annapolis on the 28th through the 30th. So that will bring welcome visitors to the city and, of course, have a positive economic impact. So outside of that, we spent a lot of time in recent weeks working on the budget, working within planning and zoning. And, of course, we were at the Finance Committee hearing this morning when the P&Z budget was presented. So that's probably enough for me.
Thank you, Mr. Rice. Alderman Savage, do you have any questions?
No, sir.
Excellent. I just have two quick follow-ups, or three follow-ups for you. On the speed lender event, can you repeat the date of that for me, please?
Yes, that will be May 11th, and we're working with the Small Business Administration and the Small Business Development Council.
Excellent. And for that, what lenders are we bringing in? Local banks, national investors, local investors, little a, little b?
The focus is on banks, but I can get give me a couple of weeks and I'll have an RSVP list for you that I can share.
Excellent, thank you. And are we trying to push that out to the business community publicly, or is the office, by that I mean, are we doing like a mass push out, or are we doing a little more targeted approach with the economic development team, like going, hey, business, we know you're looking for capital, here's this event?
Yeah, it's been I would say it's been a mass push out. We put it out in our economic development newsletter. We put it out in our economic development alert. I believe we sent we have maintained a list of businesses within the city. We sent a mass email out. We're also looking at some other options to help amplify the message, i.e., maybe doing something with the Capitol or something like that. And there's another publication that has come to my attention that hopefully would put the information out, maybe even for free as an advertisement. So we're trying to use multiple channels. The SBDC and the SBA are also putting it out through their channels. So we're hoping that between the three of us, we can provide decent coverage.
If I could ask for a flyer and some details for potential press release, I'd appreciate that, because this is a really innovative idea. I don't know if we've done this before, but I'm excited now that you presented it. And my final question is, you get your season tickets yet for the Blues?
I am a season ticket holder. Absolutely.
My man.
I was one of the first.
Oh, same here. Excellent. All right. Well, no further questions on the specific economic development update. It seems things are doing well in our little city, and we appreciate the work you're doing.
Thank
All
you.
right, up next, ID 7923, the Annapolis Head 2040 Economic Development Approach. Mr. Lashinsky, I appreciate you coming in and presenting this. This was something that I was very excited to kind of explore into. But before we start, I have one question for you.
Okay.
Do you also have Annapolis Blues season tickets?
I do.
Excellent.
I was the first.
The first guy. All right, Mr. Lashinsky, take us away. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for the chance to present. Eric Lashinsky, Chief of Comprehensive Planning, Department of Planning and Zoning. I am starting to do the rounds, sort of the final rounds, or say meeting with City Council committees in advance of releasing a draft comprehensive plan. We are on track to have that at the end of May. So I'm excited to be wrapping the process up, at least before comprehensive public review begins. So this is the first presentation to a committee in some time. Talking about the economic development approach, I work closely with Stephen Rice on economic development issues. I think a lot of what he does is program related. From a comprehensive planning perspective, I focus a lot on policies that govern our land use and physical improvements that can really catalyze economic development in the city. So that's a lot of what I'm going to talk about today. Just as a refresher, structure of the comprehensive plan, essentially we have these three city visions: the thriving city, the functional city, the adaptive city. The chapters within those are considered elements by the state definition of content that should be in a comprehensive plan. We get a lot of guidance from state of Maryland land use code. We have action matrix towards the end of the document, which really itemizes all of the recommendations in the comprehensive plan. We're looking at three foundational themes in the comprehensive plan: equity, health, resilience. Every single goal and recommended action should reinforce at least one of these themes, if not all of them. By equity, we're talking about greater awareness that exists today of historic inequities lack of investment into parts of the city, racial inequities, basically trying to reverse historic practices that moved investment to some parts of the city, not others, trying to be more focused on places in the city that have not had investment of the same caliber as other parts of the city. With health, it's really about acknowledging that our built environment contributes to our health. And if somebody chooses to walk in the city, they should not be diminishing their health in doing so. If anything, they should be improving their health. And there's just a tremendous amount of data out today that points to the built environment having effect on our livelihoods and our life expectancy. And we want to have a built environment that encourages longer life expectancy and greater health outcomes. And finally, resilience. We're clearly facing more catastrophic events than ever before. Weather-related, climate change is the cause, and we want to develop a city that we want to grow as a city that is more equipped to deal with those events and adapt to them. So one of the things I just want to acknowledge in talking about economic development, I think maybe in comparison to past comprehensive plans, this one is really written for a very broad audience. It's not just key decision makers in the city, staff, elected officials, partner agencies, but it's really the average resident. It's the property owner. It's a business owner. It's somebody who's looking to invest in the city. And so this page, I'm using a lot of page layouts from the draft comp plan, and they might be hard to see, but we'll be able to share this presentation so anybody watching at home can look at this closer. But we're trying to help people understand how to use this plan depending on who they are within the city and trying to make it relevant to them. So you see are you an Annapolis resident in one of those red boxes? Are you an Annapolis property owner? Are you a business owner, institution, or someone looking to invest in Annapolis? And we want this comprehensive plan to have meaning to a pretty broad audience. So I want to acknowledge that. Think about economic development. It's really important to start with demographics of the city, understanding who lives here, who does not live here, how that population is changing over time. This image of Pitt Moyer Rec Center during the height of COVID really underscores how big of an effect COVID had on our city. And it really acknowledged a lot of health disparities, acknowledged our ability to adapt to an event like that. It had a huge impact on small businesses, particularly restaurants. So it's impossible to not do policies without thinking about, it's impossible to think about doing policy without thinking about COVID and the effect it had on the city. And that's tied to a concept called social vulnerability, which, I've mentioned this in almost every presentation I've given on the comp plan. I'm not going to go into all the details, but essentially we have a baseline understanding of what makes a community vulnerable in the city. And it's based on the CDC's factors, 15 factors that are income related, they're household composition related, they're housing type, transportation option related, minority status and language status. And so what you have on the right is a map where the darker areas represent census tracts that are more socially vulnerable based on the CDC's matrix. And so we use this map throughout the comprehensive plan as sort of a base layer for all kinds of other information, transit, parks and open space, public facilities. The basic takeaway here is if we invest in these areas that are darker in color on the map, those are places where investment has been limited historically, and we could have the greatest impact, I think, on the population. So that's, yeah. Yeah.
If I could interrupt but tie into your commentary on the built environment, I would like to point out that the three darkest areas on the map, we have Clay Street, where we destroyed generations of wealth through, tearing down homes and businesses and building a parking garage. We have a big section of my ward, which is effectively walled in on two sides by high-speed highways. And then we have the parole area, which is walled in on four sides by high-speed highways cutting into it. So all of those things, as I'm sure you're aware, and some people of the public may or may not be, really dramatically impact the social vulnerability and the social ability for people to thrive. So
Right.
I appreciate you putting this in a nice visual data format for us.
Yeah, you're welcome. So the comprehensive plan takes an approach that says we're not going to be successful unless our most vulnerable residents are successful and have opportunities to be successful. This is a slide I've used on many other occasions. I'm not really going to dwell on it except to say that it points to population groups that we're losing in the city, namely the 25 to 34 age bracket, which is inverse to trends we're seeing in the county and the state. Also the 45 to 54 age bracket, and the 18 to 24, which might correlate with college age as well. But we're not gaining families at the same rate as the county and the state. And the cost of living remains extremely high in Annapolis, and we're one of the most unaffordable places to live in the country. I'm not really going to be spending much time on housing in this presentation, but I do want to say, make a plug for something that I've done in many other presentations, which is that, to have a sustainable economy in this city, we need a range of individuals of different income levels, and we really clearly we value diversity and inclusion in the city. That's something that is being reinforced in our comprehensive plan. It's hard to do that without having a city that is affordable to a range of different people. And we need people who not only open businesses, but are willing to work in those businesses. We're trying to have a city where people don't have to drive long distances to participate in our economy. They can live close to where they work. And this graphic simply shows the range of housing types that can facilitate that type of population and make it affordable. Just focusing on just a small portion of that missing middle housing, just duplexes alone is a housing type that we are not building in any kind of reasonable frequency. There's a whole range of duplexes in the city. In fact, some of these in this spread are triplexes, but this is a housing type that is very much associated with the Annapolis urban fabric. These images come from all over Annapolis, and many of them would not be allowed to be built today. So it's something that sort of is odd, but we've basically made it very difficult to build sort of modest affordable housing in this city. And this slide simply shows that the areas in yellow are residentially zoned areas that do not allow a duplex by right. Now, we have an accessory dwelling unit ordinance, which essentially allows a separate unit to be built on any residential property in the city. It's not the same as a duplex, which is something that where essentially two units could be built side by side or as ownership units. What I really want to talk about tonight is more about the economy of the city, sort of how to facilitate through that through the built environment. And these charts come from the economic market study that we did for the comprehensive plan that was produced by BAE Urban Economics in 2021. A lot of the numbers are still pretty consistent. I want to point to the chart on the right, on the left. Local jobs by industry in 2021. Some of this just confirms what we already know. Public administration at the bottom. Let's see. Actually, let me. Second from the bottom, it's clearly state government, naval installation, local government, county government, public administration jobs are a large percent of the jobs in the city. But then we have accommodation and food service, which is a little bit above that, 13.2% of the jobs. About midway through the chart, we have professional, scientific, and technical services. That's about 9% of the jobs. And then retail trade, close to the top, is about 12%, a little over 12%. These are, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Lushinsky. I just got a quick, two quick questions on that front, and if you get to them later in the presentation, you can tell me to hold my horses.
Okay.
Public administration, so that effectively means government and government related, so things like the Naval Academy, the state government, city and county government, correct?
That's right.
Do we know professional, scientific, and technical services, that is higher than I thought it would be. What are the primary drivers of that? Do we have like a subsection where we have a deeper understanding of those?
Not in this report. I mean, we might be able to find some breakdown of that, but I think it honestly ranges from accounting to maritime services. I'm guessing, pretty broad range of services. But yeah.
Thank you.
Sure. In the upper right, principal employers in the city of Annapolis, the top few are exactly the ones you just mentioned: State of Maryland, Anne Arundel County government, U.S. Naval Academy, City of Annapolis government. But then after that, with the exception of St. John's College, almost all of them are those retail/professional service, a lot of hospitality companies. That really makes up the remainder of the list. And then at the bottom, retail market overview. I just highlighted from this report, the retail vacancy rate was 3.2%, very low. And Stephen mentioned the combined commercial vacancy rate last month. I think it was like 6%, which I guess is office plus retail, plus flex and industrial. So that points to most of our retail commercial space is being rented, is being utilized. There's an opportunity for additional retail space if we can realize it. And so that kind of brings us to the economic development themes that we highlight in the comprehensive plan. This is from the municipal growth chapter. Evolving tourism, inclusive opportunities, strengthening the maritime industry, and the cultural economy. Clearly we're not a city that is adding large industrial operations, large corporate enterprises, but we do have a number of niche industries here, particularly in the tourism, maritime industries, and increasingly in the cultural economy that could all grow and can all change over time. To market conditions, changing preferences, travel behaviors. And with inclusive opportunities, the point here is that there are things we already do to encourage underrepresented populations to participate in that economy and have a stake in it. And there's more we can do. And these are sort of the four big themes that we're identifying related to economic development in the near future. Now, all of these play out the urban landscape in terms of the physical space of the city. And it's impossible to talk about those themes without talking about the kind of urban landscape that contributes to them, that provides a foundation for them. And so what I want to talk about for a bit is how do we get to a built environment that not only helps to create retail opportunities, but also improves our environment, our health, connects residents, visitors to more opportunities, is safe. It's not this type of development pattern. This is a kind of auto-oriented pattern as seen on Upper West Street. It's kind of a holdover from several decades ago. We're transitioning slowly, but really this comprehensive plan is looking at a future where we have a more vibrant streetscape, there's better street trees and more safer places to walk and sit, and better environment to connect people to small businesses, regardless of whether they're driving or not. Not every part of the city is going to look like this, but in general, there's an opportunity to provide this type of mixed-use street environment to every neighborhood in the city and enable people to get to services and conveniences without jumping in their car. I want to share a quick video. Let's see if it can work here. And this just kind of this is just 3 minutes, and it's from an economic analysis firm that we recently hired to do a study. I'm going to talk about that study in a little bit, but they explain some of what I'm getting at here. I'm going to play it right now. Let's see if it works.
I'm Joe Minicozy, and I'm the director of Urban 3 based in Asheville, North Carolina. We help cities look at land use, urban design, and economics so they can see how they're doing financially and what they can be doing better. What we consistently find is that municipalities and their counties perform better when they invest their dollars in walkable mixed-use development patterns instead of other forms of development like sprawl. Think of a company that consumes raw materials, adds some labor and know-how, and creates a product. This company will need to know the cost of their materials, their labor, revenue, and the ultimate market value of the product in order to see whether they will be successful or not. Cities are actually quite similar. Their raw material is a finite resource, the land within their borders, and their product is their tax base, which is what they need to survive and prosper. We have looked at cities all over the country, and when you do the math, it's easy to see that dense downtown development returns a greater investment to the community than putting tax dollars towards sprawl. Let's look at some examples. My house sits on 1/10 of an acre lot. Our municipal property taxes are about $1,100 a year, or about $11,000 an acre. This big box retailer sits on a 34-acre lot. Its total property taxes are a whopping $221,000 a year, which equates to about $6,500 an acre net to the city. Taking the city's portion of property taxes and adding the estimated retail taxes, it equals $54,000 in total tax production per acre. That seems like a lot until we compare it to a building downtown. This boarded-up department store was converted into a mixed-use building site that includes retail, office, and residential space. So where does this mixed-use building come in? The city nets a considerable $330,000 in property taxes per acre. Add to it the estimated $83,000 in retail taxes per acre, which brings the total to the city to $413,000 per acre. That's more than 7.5 times the productivity of the big box site. Even looking at jobs, the big box store produces about 6 jobs per acre, while our mixed-use building comes in at 74 jobs per acre. And let's not forget the downtown building also contains 90 residential units per acre. Those residents are working and shopping and creating additional economic activity. The big box store has 0 residential units. But remember, most companies need to count more than raw material costs. They also need to account for their labor, management, and know-how. This is the investment they make in turning raw materials into finished product. Cities are the same. In order to turn land into tax base, they have to add a special something called infrastructure. At a minimum, cities add value to their land by providing streets, utility service, police protection, and fire protection. The more spread out a city becomes, the more expensive it is to deliver those services, especially when that acre of land pays less per acre. Unfortunately, when cities consider new developments, too often they focus on taxes that they hope will flow to the city coffers without adequately considering the land base they will use up or the costs they will incur. In city after city, big and small, when we do the math, it's clear that dense downtown development is much more productive than anything else in the community. Downtown development is the golden goose of urban economics, and it's the best bet for cities that want to prosper in the long run.
I want to be clear that, advance this, Annapolis is not Asheville, and clearly we have very few large big box stores or 5-story mixed-use buildings within our city limits. But what Mr. Minicozy of this Urban 3 firm is saying is scalable, and it's something that the basic takeaway is, single-use buildings on a large parking lot site are not the best use of the land in a city that has very limited land base as Annapolis. A mixed-use building that integrates retail and residential is going to provide a greater return. And as we've been working on the comprehensive plan for a few years now, I could say that probably the one thing that everybody seems to agree on is they want more walkable places in the city. And that's really kind of the foundational building block that we're looking at. So when we start our municipal growth chapter, we highlight this building on Annapolis Street in West Annapolis. It's a relatively newly constructed building. Fits perfectly within the streetscape. It has retail on the ground floor, apartments above. I'm not going to read this passage, but I've read it at past presentations, and basically just underscores that when we talk about municipal growth, we're not just talking about new development, but we're talking about the jobs, the people, the infrastructure, the housing that's associated with growth. And we make decisions that can calibrate that growth to exactly what we want to see. A lot of that is in the comprehensive plan. So when we talk about goals and recommended actions with our municipal growth chapter, it begins with goal 1, grow in a way that ensures public facilities and infrastructure remain adequately sized and equipped to deliver exceptional service to existing residents, institutions, and businesses. It's really fundamental. We have to be responsible in the way that we grow, and we cannot grow in a way that does not allow us to provide those services. Growing in a way that makes it more affordable to service our properties is really important. That's sort of one of the takeaways of the video we just saw. The second goal, promote exceptional development within the designated growth area that addresses the city's planning goals and, in particular, contributes to the creation of good-paying jobs and the fiscal strength of the city. I didn't show a map of our growth area, but I have in past presentations, and the basic point there is there's very limited area for the city to grow, to expand. There's just very few parcels at the edge of the city. We have the opportunity, as there's consideration of annexing any of those parcels, whether they be on Solomon's Island Road or in the Bay Ridge Road vicinity. They should provide a net positive return to the city in terms of the cost of servicing those property and what they return to the city in terms of value, environmental value. What does that part of the city need to be successful? What can that part of the city do to complement the city that already exists? Growth in the number of households will prioritize increasing workforce and affordable housing. Clearly, that's something that we're not doing well currently, and there are policies that we can create to incentivize housing affordability. And then finally, prioritize revitalization and redevelopment that best connects residents to retail services and amenities. And that's that big idea of developing in a way that's more efficient in the land base that we have and connects compatible land uses together in such a way that you don't have to drive everywhere. And when you look at our future land use map for this current comp plan, it should say 2023 now, but the big change between the one that was in the 2009 comprehensive plan and the one today, we're expanding this red area, which signifies mixed use. may not look like a significant amount, but it is. We've basically taken all of the lands that were previously designated as office or commercial use and put those into a mixed use category. So they're structured along our major corridors primarily. And then we've acknowledged a lot of the green spaces in the city that were sort of embedded in other property parcels previously, and kind of acknowledged that there are places in the city that we want to be more deliberate in preserving and protecting as they add value to the city as well. It's well documented that natural resources, parks, forested areas add value to properties, adjacent properties. So there's a number of benefits that they'll be providing in the city if we're successful at protecting them. Just a word about mixed use. You heard it in the video pretty clearly. Why mixed use? Well, we have very little land to develop in this city. We have a lot of properties that are not performing well economically, environmentally. As they redevelop, there's an opportunity to do things better and be more efficient in how they develop. And so when we talk about infill redevelopment, we're talking about parcels that may already be developed today, but when they get redeveloped, we can be better at managing stormwater, providing places for people to live and shop and access conveniences, all on the same site. And so we do a pretty big emphasis on mixed use in this comprehensive plan. We provide guidance for how decision makers should be thinking about mixed use. What are the sort of qualities that will define performance in a mixed use redevelopment? And I want to highlight right here, you can't see my cursor, but on the right column, midway down, it says commercial and institutional uses balanced with community needs. There's a whole range of mixed use properties in the city today, despite the fact that we don't have a zoning code that really encourages it throughout the city. They're not all going to be the same. They're really going to be reflective of the neighborhood context that they're in. This building, for example, at Westgate Circle, meets a lot of the performance standards that are on this page, but it's clearly not of a scale that would be appropriate for other parts of the city. It's very appropriate for its current location. So when we look at mixed use across the city, there's examples everywhere in every part of the city, and they're all, I would say that the ones that I'm identifying here are all very much reflective of their context and contribute to their surrounding neighborhoods and provide services and opportunities for business. The black box on the map indicates the one zoning district of the city that actually is a mixed use district. It's our mixed use zone, the Inner West Street area. Everything else that is mixed use today is in a zoning district that where mixed use may be allowed, in many cases is not really the main intent of that zoning district. And so when you look at our future land use map, which is really the most foundational exhibit in the comprehensive plan, it tells us how we want to use the land within the city in the next 20 years. And you compare that to our zoning map, which is a different document, different exhibit. They don't really look very similar. One goal of this comprehensive plan is to develop a zoning map that is much better reflection of our future land use map. Within our zoning map, and especially if you zoom in, you can really see how our zoning districts have just been kind of tweaked over time to reflect different interests, and they're not necessarily reflective of community context or
Mr. Wishinsky, could you go back, Mr. Chair, may I?
Yeah.
Could you go back a slide?
Yeah, sure.
I'm just looking at Ward 7, and so the left is what you'd be proposing for the comp plan. Because I think we're starting to get some more mixed use across the street, and I see you have it highlighted, which is good, around the Giant and Bay Village. But I'm just thinking, and I know this is economic matters, not transportation, but I think it's all linked as far as I'm trying to think how best to get people, for example, or even the visitors who have their boats down at the Maritime District on Edgewood Road, how to get them from there to the mixed use centers. Again, maybe we could bring this up at the Transportation Commission, but as far as like maybe highlighting possibilities for, because I've mentioned with staff wanting to, I think Alderman Channemeyer's called it like a road diet on Edgewood Road that might include some kind of other transportation, be it a small shuttle or bicycles, something like that.
Actually, I have a section on transportation in just a moment.
Okay.
Because you're absolutely right. I mean, the transportation network is intimately tied to land use. Just briefly, one of the major implementation tools for getting to that land use strategy that will really catalyze the ideas of our future land use map is transitioning from our current Euclidean zoning, which is not a reference to Euclid, but rather a Supreme Court case early in the history of zoning related to single land uses. And that's essentially our current zoning code really prioritizes single uses on lands. The form-based code is something that prioritizes the look of the building and how it's situated on a property to really encourage a kind of urban environment that we want to see, or whatever kind of environment we want to see. It doesn't have to be urban, but it's a way of doing zoning that you see the definition here. It really gives us greater control over the future development. It's more predictable, and it will ultimately provide a greater set of benefits to its context. We did this as a trial with our West Annapolis commercial area. We did a West Annapolis master plan as part of our comprehensive planning process, and we sort of, in concept, came up with new form-based zoning districts for that commercial area. And you can see the Village Main Street district is along Annapolis Street, where you're right next to an established residential area. And so the look of those buildings would be very much a Village Main Street character. And that building I showed earlier at the beginning of the municipal growth chapter, that is on Annapolis Street. You have a village corridor along Route Boulevard, which is your higher volume roadway. And so the buildings might be larger and have less architectural detail. Village Square acknowledges that existing West Annapolis shopping center is really popular and important to the neighborhood and should be kind of preserved as its own zoning district, but perhaps could be reimagined as a shopping area that doesn't have a sea of parking, but has more public open spaces and apartments. And then we have a transition zone in the middle between the Village Main Street and the Village Corridor, which essentially means that the buildings are transitioning from a lower density to a higher density along the corridor. And it's all relative. When I talk about density, it's all relative here in Annapolis. Nothing is really truly high density. But this is just a kind of a proof of concept. This is very well supported by the West Annapolis community. I think the idea was that these types of districts would have applications in other parts of the city. And so just at a practical level, we won't be doing a zoning rewrite until we have a comprehensive plan adopted. And we really want to start that process from the beginning and look at our existing zoning code and really kind of dissect it. And that'll be a big undertaking. But where that might go is, this is an example of the zoning map for South Bend, Indiana, where our current U.S. Transportation Secretary was Mayor Pete Buttigieg. I think he may have overseen this project that was a zoning rewrite for that city. It's a very different city. It's more urban than Annapolis, has a larger downtown, but you can kind of see a clarity to the zoning district that's different than what we have here. And you look at the types of zoning districts: suburban neighborhood 1, suburban neighborhood 2, urban neighborhood 1, urban neighborhood 2. Now, they're not very exciting names, but they tell you the kind of character that of that zoning district. You know, you have a downtown district, you have a neighborhood center, a university district. You know, there's an urban neighborhood flex district. So they really acknowledge the kind of density and character that is intended. And you can see some patterns in the landscape of the city based on those zoning districts, the colors, along major corridors and pockets, neighborhood pockets. So we want to get to, and I think one of the goals of the comprehensive plan is certainly to get to a zoning map ultimately, you know, in the next decade that is seems more intuitive and clear to more people, and makes it easier for people to invest in the city and find opportunity here. The firm Urban 3 produced the video that you saw earlier. They've already been working in Anne Arundel County, and that was a selling point for why we hired them to do this upcoming land and infrastructure valuation study. I mean, they're going to be looking at every parcel in the city from a value basis, looking at the cost of servicing those parcels in terms of infrastructure and public services. They're going to be looking at the revenue that those properties generate. And the map that you see in the upper left is the Anne Arundel County, and those spires are representing the value of the properties in the county. And you can see these purple spires represent Annapolis, the highest net revenue generating parcels in the city are the highest spires, and everything lower than that is diminishing returns. So it's no surprise that Annapolis is sort of the economic engine for the county. It's where we have a large percentage of jobs. And by concentrating things here, we're able to protect large portions of the county from development. They're going to look at infrastructure costs over time and ways of building more efficiently. That's the image in the upper right. So there's a lot of goals and recommendations in this land use chapter. I'll just quickly read through them. Simplify the zoning code so that it's easier to develop infill projects that complement the neighborhoods and creek sheds where they're located. It's sort of about being more sensible, but that would ultimately be reflected in the zoning code. Promote the improvement and reinvestment in vacant or underutilized parcels, and that relates to both vacant lots, but also properties that have a large parking area that's underutilized, that could be better utilized. Identify zoning language adjustments to the residential districts that will help bring about more housing options for workforce and middle-income residents. Some of those in our current zoning could be relatively straightforward, but over time, preferences change. Like I said earlier, we've sort of zoned out a lot of sensible housing types in the city, which has had an effect on the cost of living in the city. Land use goal 4, support and sustain the expansion of businesses and private sector employment and the revitalization of the tourism sector, including restaurants and retail, which has been adversely impacted by the pandemic. Even though we may be somewhat removed from the pandemic. At this point, it still has lingering effects that we need to acknowledge. This is a unique comp plan in that regard, where a lot of work happened during the pandemic. 5, protect and secure the historic resource values of downtown Annapolis while promoting both its economic vitality and its role as the central civic gathering place for city residents. And so this is pretty broad, but gets into issues like short-term rentals and types of businesses that can complement the historic district. Finally, Land Use Goal 6, link the city together with a network formed by the city's remaining natural areas, improved open space, parks, and institutional uses. And this is an overarching theme throughout the comprehensive plan, this idea of the Greenway System. That Greenway map that we developed for the comprehensive plan is in 3 or 4 different chapters. And so it first shows up in this land use chapter. So for transportation, as you mentioned, Alderman Savage, it's intimately linked to land use. How we get around, the way we construct our streets have a lot of influence on the kinds of businesses that can, kinds of developments that can be on those streets. And we're transitioning, I think, as a city to a place that will have more options for getting around. I mean, this image of our micro-mobility options, the scooters and the e-bikes, is just one experiment, I would say, in trying to provide more options to people, and it's been really successful. Our micro-mobility contractor, Bird, has given us a tremendous amount of data on the system, and they've told us that the amount of rides per vehicle in Annapolis is something like 4 times what you'd have in Alexandria, Virginia, which has, I think, 5 times the number of vehicles that we have here. We have a relatively few number, about 150 over the whole city, split evenly between e-bikes and scooters. But safety is clearly on our minds when we're talking about transportation and the kinds of roadways that we have here. We're seeing an uptick in pedestrian and cyclist injuries and fatalities. The map on the right shows the trend in locations where we see these reoccurring incidents. Crashes from 2015 to 2021. It's along our major corridors primarily, which could be redesigned. And there's a big initiative right now that's led by the county for Forest Drive that the city has been participating in. And I expect there will be some significant changes along the Forest Drive corridor to make that safer. I think we are always trying to balance modes of getting around, whether it's driving, walking, bicycle. Right now, everything is really skewed towards driving. We're trying to make changes so that you don't have to choose which mode to use to feel safer. That's kind of one of the big ideas. And this idea of complete streets, where the streets that we create, that we enhance, are designed for all types of users, regardless of how you choose to get around. Image on the bottom right is on Chesapeake Avenue at Burnside Street, where we've added a better crosswalk condition and tightened the curb so that it's an easier street to cross. This remains a challenging street to cross in other locations. But finally, parking, it's sort of the often the overlooked aspect of our transportation policy that has a tremendous influence on how we get around. It's been studied extensively in other places, and there's a growing trend of not mandating parking requirements for new developments and simply letting the property developer determine what their needs are. It's taken a while to get to that point where people feel comfortable, but it's remarkable how many municipalities around the country are moving in that direction. Yeah.
Have the municipalities that gotten rid of it had some kind of cataclysmic event going on, or have they collapsed into the sea, or has everything been fine?
I haven't heard of any events. In fact, I think that most of the stories I see are of certain developments basically being having an easier time getting built, and basically positive developments for cities once they remove that policy of mandating a certain amount of parking. It's not to say that parking will not still be created. It's just that the development decide what their ultimate tenants or users will need, what their visitors will need, their patrons will need to be successful. So it's a business decision, and I think we have a recommendation regarding parking, reducing parking mandates, both in the transportation chapter and in the land use chapter.
Mr. Chair, just can you go back, please?
Yeah.
I just want to point out that maybe it's just the image I'm looking at from here, but you have a bunch of the marinas, at least down Edgewood Road, listed as off-street surface parking, and also some of the other businesses down there, which I don't think are all. You might want a different color, even with like around the stadium. That is parking, but it's also private and it's grassed.
That's a good point. Technically, the large boatyards that you're referring to, they use
boat parking, but
yeah,
still.
yeah. I mean, it is. It's parking for boats, and it's sort of multi-use. In the off season, they may have fewer boats and more cars. But you're right. It is misleading, I think, given that it's used. I'd say primarily for boats, and it's part of their business, to have that type of space. And we went through a whole maritime zoning effort that really identified that type of boatyard space as critical to the industry. So I think you're right that we may want to reclassify that. Good point.
I guess could you also, you mentioned a little bit about business decision as far as parking, but there are certain, I think, types of parking which government would want to have an interest in making sure is provided. So how do you balance that? Because that sounds like a very laissez-faire economic approach versus the intention of the comp plan is to have a very planned, deliberate approach to.
Right.
Just how do you balance those kind of things?
Well, so there are definitely requirements for accessible parking within our city code that aren't going to go away, and that would be something that would still need to be a mandate. I think in certain contexts, the ability to reduce a parking mandate, it does need to reflect, the context of a particular commercial area or residential area. I mean, for example, a place that has a high amount of street parking that a business might see as like viable parking for its patrons. If that's close proximity to a large residential area, there could be conflict there. So, I mean, there's some study that needs to happen, I think. I don't think we've looked at the whole city in this context, within parking, and there really are very few places where we think there's going to be that kind of conflict. Eastport is one of those places, and one of the things that any parking reform advocate will say is that by taking a reduction in parking requirement, you sort of shift it onto the public realm. You sort of say, well, somebody doesn't have to, a private developer does not have to pay to develop off-street parking. So then they push it onto public parking. And if we're not managing public parking, on-street parking, or other types of public parking amenities, if we're not managing that in any way, then you run into a conflict. You sort of have to, you can't necessarily have a parking reform to development without also managing the public parking. I think that's one of the key things that has to be done. You have to.
I don't disagree with that. But it just seems like there may be certain areas where parking reforms could more easily be implemented. And I could see value in the comp plan identifying some of those areas. Just for example, we do like to talk about Eastport, but I think parking woes would be less there if we did have some closer public facilities like structured parking somewhere, or if we had some other more transportation options to address that.
What I would like to add, though, is that they're trying to accommodate priority cars, number one, which when you have a car-centric policy like parking requirements, you actively interfere with those other transportation options. The reason why Outer West is so car-centric is due largely to things like giant parking lots dominating causing more strip mall style developments, pushing things farther away from the street. That also increases the demand for more people coming into cars. Every single study that has been done onto this has shown that the more you try to accommodate cars, the more cars you get. And ironically, one of the things that is shown to reduce car use is not making that the number one priority. And when you end up not having this, people can figure out how much asphalt they need, you get things like the Bay Ridge Giant, you get things like Clock Tower Plaza, you get things like the Kohl's Plaza. It has these giant, overbuilt seas of impervious asphalt that don't get used.
Yeah,
and they're more likely to build those larger asphalt things just to give themselves the flexibility in case one store leaves and they want to try and fill it with another tenant.
One tool, kind of to your point, one tool that some jurisdictions have used, is parking maximums, where, you basically to sort of reduce the propensity of a large parking area.
And I'm not arguing against either of those approaches. I'm just trying to make the point that I think if comp plan, I think it might be easier to institute some of those reforms if we can identify certain parts of the town where that might work. You're kind of doing the same thing with mixed use zoning and expanding that. Mm-hmm. And also, I think form-based zoning, at least in the past, I know that was talked about being tried in a couple parts of town. But I do think we have I think West Annapolis, and I think parts of Ward 7 really are parts of the town, and I think in Ward 5 too, that are starting to see a lot of development change, a lot of properties come up for sale. I think West Annapolis as well. So I think it's good to anticipate. Because if we expect to get rid of cars, it's gonna be a Sisyphean task.
Yeah.
We're not gonna be able to get there. But I do think we need to start to look at policies that we can implement to move away from that as much as we can. But I don't think it's going to be able to be done wholesale.
Yeah, I could see a strategy where certain zoning districts are more well suited to basically prove it out, and so people can kind of see how it would work. Well, just really quick, I'm just going to read the four goals of our transportation chapter, which really underscore how this plays into kind of a transition in how we get around. Shift the mix of mobility investments towards public transit, micromobility, ride-sharing, active modes, and support for telework options to double the usage of these modes by 2040. We don't invest enough in these. The comp plan ultimately is a document that asserts our values as a city, and ultimately our capital budget does the same. And I think to accelerate some of this, we need to invest more in these alternate modes of getting around. And there's a number of recommendations about how we would do that. Goal 2 is build a policy environment in Annapolis that is mode neutral, meaning not prioritizing one type of mobility over another, equitable and oriented to safety. 3, transportation will take a leadership role in creating a greener and healthier Annapolis to sustain the economic, environmental, and societal quality of the city. And then 4, expand partnerships with key public and private stakeholders to improve mobility, safety, and connectivity for residents and visitors alike. And this is key because a lot of our roads aren't managed by the city of Annapolis. They're state roads, or Forest Drive is owned and managed by the county. So we already do work very closely with those partners, but in some cases, their interests are different than the city's interests, and we have to find some common ground. And I think everybody in general is moving towards a more kind of walkable, safer paradigm for transportation, but not all are moving at the same pace. This is the last part of the presentation. Just quickly want to say, I mentioned the cultural economy at the beginning of the presentation as a key part of our economic development strategy. I think more than any other time in the city's history, there's an emphasis on telling stories of the city's cultural heritage that have really just been not part of the mainstream narrative of the city. And that is to say, the history of minority communities and ethnic communities, and a lot of this interest in that type of cultural heritage has been there. It just has not been front and center in the way we present the city to visiting populations. And it's really remarkable to see the acceleration of that. I mean, this image here is from the Museum of Historic Annapolis, the newly opened museum at the foot of Main Street, highlighting civil rights era in Annapolis. We're doing projects all over downtown and elsewhere in the city that highlight newer themes, narratives that have been around that just haven't really been well told. The Cars Beach preservation in Ward 7, for example. A number of projects in the downtown area. Maynard Burgess House, right across the street from City Hall, is almost finished its restoration process. That was a significant building owned by successive African-American families. The Burgess House, the City Dock, is the last remaining working waterman's house. We have the Masonic Lodge on Clay Street, the Hoppy Adams House in Parole, named after the famous civil rights era DJ, who was the host at the Cars Beach music events. I mean, that's an exciting project that is getting rolling. Got some significant grant funding recently. And then there's other major projects happening in downtown. The Bryce House that maybe don't fit into this theme of diversifying the narratives, but obviously still contribute to our historical and cultural preservation environment. And that's really the foundation for our downtown. So all of these things bring more visitors to the city. They'll bring people who may have not considered coming to the city, or it's going to diversify our visitor base and really provide another lens to see the city. When you look at our arts and entertainment district, there's a proposal in this comprehensive plan to enlarge that district, to expand to places that have an opportunity to enliven our arts and entertainment district. For example, reaching to the West Street Library, our Mike Bush Annapolis Library, including the Park Place development, continuing down Spa Road to whatever happens at the city-owned former Public Works facility. Those properties will expand the potential to bring in arts-oriented businesses and visitors. And the Arts and Entertainment District is a state regulated district, or I should say authorized district. There's many arts and entertainment districts across the state and other communities. They really become the foundation for investment and bringing in grant funding, and they provide tax incentives to businesses. So it's a great tool. We also have the design district, which is not a state designated district, but is something that is more organic and has developed through various property owners in our industrial area. And that also should be supported as a tool for the cultural economy. So when you look at the goals for this section, practice an approach to historic and cultural preservation that is inclusive and equitable and fully acknowledges the diversity of cultures that have created the Annapolis of today. Expand the reach of the Annapolis Arts and Entertainment District and growth of the creative economy. Expand the capacity of the city to initiate and manage formalized cultural programs and public realm enhancements. And this is important to acknowledge because we actually have a pretty significant amount of funding now coming through our hotel tax to our Arts and Public Places Commission, which is a volunteer board, but we don't have a full-time staff person at the city that really oversees our arts and cultural programming. I mean, there's sort of contract, or say, person in the mayor's office does a lot of work on this, but that position may not continue from one mayoral administration to another. So I think there's an opportunity to have some more direction in this area. And finally, enhance the sustainability of the historic district through a multifaceted approach to district-wide improvements. Essentially, a lot happens in the historic district in terms of preserving sites, but activating those sites, doing improvements to the public realm. We've seen market space right near here during COVID became an outdoor plaza. It's been really successful. City, worked out a lease agreement with the restaurants. I mean, that has the potential to become a new place in the long term, not just for the short term. So it's things like that, creative ideas that won't necessarily detract from the historic district, but could actually enhance the historic district. And just lastly, I'm not going to go, there's 2 slides, just to say, environmental sustainability is also key to our economy, particularly in light of climate change impacts to the city. And when you look at our budget in the city and the recommendations in our comprehensive plan, there are a lot that are aimed at protecting the city's assets, encouraging investments that will make us more resilient and allow us to adapt to more catastrophic events. So I'm not going into goals and recommendations for this section, but it's just really important to acknowledge that resilience is part of our economic strategy as well. So that's it. Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Lushinsky. That was a pretty in-depth presentation. One of the things that I am very excited about is the expansion of mixed use opportunities, because as we see time and time again, the closer you bring people together, the less you spread them apart, the more actual opportunity for economic benefit for more people you get. There's a reason Outer West Street or Upper West Street looks the way it does and has its limited pedestrian traffic. And then there's a reason Inner West gets a little more business opportunities. It's because more people are out on foot enjoying it. It's more of a place. I've been asking my questions as we've been going along. Alderman Savage, do you have any further questions for comp plan and the economic impacts?
No, sir.
Excellent. All right. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it. And if there is anything else for the good of the order?
Thank you for the opportunity.
All right. Well, in that case, do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
I'll second. All in favor?
Aye.